Top Assistant, episode 5. I'm Kevin Wilson alongside the great coach Eric Skeeters. And coach, every week you got some sort of outfit going on here. And I mean, I ain't think I'd see a highlighter during this recording. But, you got the hat, the shirt going. What do we have going on here?
So, in honor of our guest, where we formally met, I literally was a fan of his since his first book that I know of, Season on the Brink, Inside Indiana Basketball. Where you currently are located in Bloomington, Indiana.
Okay.
But this is obviously, what is that, March 16th, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Orioles started, there we go. The Orioles started this line of hats with they honored us, Ryan Odom threw out the first pitch, and we were playing the Cleveland Indians at the time, the Guardians now. But guess who was the manager of the Cleveland Indians?
Who was it?
Let me get to it.
No.
And he grabs the guys and telling them, well, let's introduce the guest first. So the most
busting through the seams with excitement is Eric Skeeters.
Yes. Literally, like I'm chomping at the bit.
Let's get him in here. So, very special guest joining us, the John Feinstein. You know him for some familiar and fantastic works of art. Season on the Brink, new book that just dropped a month or so ago, Feherty, that we'll get into as well, where nobody knows your name, but the tons. We can go all day just dropping and lauding the praise here. But the legendary sports writer and journalist, John Feinstein. How are you this morning, good sir?
Kevin, Eric, I'm well. It's good to be with you, and I appreciate your having me.
So,
absolutely.
As we were coming on, we were having some technical difficulty, and I got to get this Pat Kennedy out because, John, I worked for him for 5 years. I left the ACC to come work for him because he taught me the business of college basketball. People didn't know that he was the incoming president at NABC that year. Like, they were looking at me like I had 3 heads of why would you leave Seth Greenberg and Virginia Tech going into the ACC to go work for Pat Kennedy at Towson. Everything I didn't know, he taught me about everything that besides recruiting and X's and O's on the court. But he was an old school head coach, had been a head coach from 1980. He replaced Jim Valvano.
Yep.
And so at Iona. And so from 1980 to 2004, when I came to join him, he had a secretary as a head coach. So think about that transformation in technology, right? This guy's at Iona, Florida State, DePaul, Montana, and he comes to Towson. And he's just getting a cell phone. And so literally, shout out to my man Keith Goody, was a coach of the Baltimore AAU team called Baltimore Select. And he literally asked me for this guy's number 5 times a season. Hey, Skeet. And if Robbie Kennedy ever sees this, his nephew that runs it, hey, boss. He always say something like 4, 5, 6 times. You got Keith Goody's number? I said, yeah, coach, here, give me your phone. I'll put it in your phone for you. So all you got to do is dial, push the K and the E, and it'll start to pop up. Okay, yeah, good. I did that 5 times a season. I know.
He still hasn't learned it, has he?
So the funny thing for me is, so I moved on to South Florida. He moved on. I think Pat's he's working with this technology, this company that does recruiting websites and evaluations for student athletes. Be the Beast, I think it's called. I hope I'm getting that right, Pat.
Heard of it.
But he text message. I'm sitting in my office one day and I'm at my phone and a text message came from Pat Kennedy and I almost fell out my chair. I said, holy shit, he knows how to text message. There is hope for the old school. Like, he had a leather bound telephone book in 2005, 2006. I know we were coaching Gary Neal and, we're rocking and rolling at Towson, and he's getting pages from like one of those Hallmark stores to put in the, it's got the binder, and he's still adding pages and putting people's names. He was old school, John, to the umpteenth degree.
Well, Eric, I still don't know how to put phone numbers in my phone to this day. My children do it for me.
I love it. And being your being, like Pat's been a head coach. So he's been a head coach since 1980. Secretary, like he would sit in his desk and literally call out to the secretary, Carolyn, where's the staff? Staff, can we meet? He would just yell out.
Well, I'll quickly tell you this in terms of old school coaches. I was working in the office at the Washington Post one Sunday many years ago, and it was ACC Media Day in Greensboro. Okay. And I needed to get in touch with Dean Smith for a story I was working on. Mm-hmm. So I asked a good friend of mine, Keith Drum, who at the time worked for the Durham Morning Herald, if he would just pass the Post's 800 number to Dean and ask Dean to call me on that number. Just call the 800 number and ask for me. So Keith did it, and Dean looked at him, and most coaches will say, well, what does he want to talk to me about? Dean said, I don't know how to dial an 800 number. So he never dialed the phone. His secretary always dialed the phone.
Once again, great to have the great John Feinstein here. I'm sorry.
Been called worse.
Here on the show, I know, right? You mentioned the Washington Post. Why don't we just start there? I mean, the New York Times, interesting news over this past week where
heartbreaking news.
Getting rid of their sports journalism, essentially, with the acquisition of The Athletic. Such historic things done over the decades, and now just kind of being thrown to the wayside as we see AI, the rise of AI, and the acquisition of The Athletic. What are your thoughts on where we are in sports journalism today?
Well, I'm so old, Kevin, that I still get the New York Times and Washington Post at home every morning.
Amen.
I read them while I'm having my coffee. And many of the writers I grew up reading and then later looking up to when I got to meet them, guys like Dave Anderson and Pete Alfano and Neil Amdur and Harvey Ayrton and on down the list, all worked for the New York Times. And there was a time when I aspired to work for the New York Times because I grew up in New York and I read the Times and the Post, New York Post every day. Times in the morning, Post I'd pick up on the way home from school. And when the Athletics started, I was all for it. Employ good sports writers committing good sports journalism, and they've done a good deal of that. Mm-hmm. But just recently they laid off 20 guys, many of whom are good friends of mine. Mm-hmm. And the Times bought them a couple of years ago. And started sort of incorporating them into sports. And that was an awkward situation. And then they just turned around, and then what's a corporate move, it has nothing to do with journalism, that's for sure. They eliminated the sports department, 50 guys roughly, who will either be moved to other jobs or within the paper, or maybe they'll be moved to The Athletic, or maybe they'll lose their jobs, although the Times claims there'll be no layoffs. This is devastating for journalism in general, not just sports journalism.
Amen.
We all know newspapers are struggling to survive. I happen to be lucky enough to work at one of the few papers that's still making money, although a lot of that is through the internet, but I don't care where the money comes from as long as they still pay me. But this is another death knell for sports journalism. And it's the New York Times. It's not the New York Times. Yeah. The New York Times.
Yeah. No, they don't.
That's why their slogan for years is all the news that's fit to print. Well, if you get the print newspaper, you're not getting any sports unless you pay extra to get online to get The Athletic. It's terrible.
No, that's it. I was an avid newspaper reader and still am to this day. I get the Post online. In my younger days, as a kid, my dad owned the 7-Eleven, so Washington Post, Baltimore Sun. The Sun had a morning Sun and an evening Sun.
Yep.
And then we opened the store in 1981. So 1983, what hit USA Today.
Yep.
And so the first USA Today Player of the Year, high school basketball, was Reggie Williams. Right there, they gave him the award right there at Baltimore Civic Center as the championship. I was a freshman at Cardinal Gibbons High School. So I read the newspaper, and that was in the 80s. As an athlete, your name was in the paper, like the box scores and things of that nature. They did a feature article or things of that nature. If you made the paper, as far as the box score. That's how we followed sports. I went to college, and we would go to the library to read other newspapers in other cities about what's going on with our friends that are playing in other cities, in other states around the country. So that's it's a technology, the great thing. It's like analytics in basketball. And so at UMBC, John, Griff came in. Griff Aldridge, now head coach at Longwood. Griff was analytics.
Yeah, because he was a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. And to a degree, I was still open to learn it, and obviously he knew it. But at the same time, it was like, Griff, we got to have a feel. And Griff played, so there's no knock on Griff.
He played,
but he was coming into the coaching world of college basketball full-fledged, and I was, just explaining to him, yes, the numbers, yes, but they don't tell you time and score. They don't tell you situations. They don't tell you if a guy's hurt or healthy. So let's put that into, and we went to play James Madison, and there were some deals with some injuries, and it was like one or two kids, and this is kind of, pat myself on the back, but Griff and I had great, and that's why I still love him.
Kevin, that's the first, Eric patting himself on the back.
Listen,
who you telling?
So that's a part of the show, John. It's shameless plug all over the place, and that's, hey, guess what?
It's allowed.
Cuts a check and sponsors the show. I would do the best job I can to get the information out there. But playing James Madison and somebody who was not playing for those first 5 or 6 games of non-conference game. Did you? I don't know. You guys didn't travel with us to the non-conference that first year, and literally a guy that had barely played the season, but it was a start of the year before because people were hurt. And actually, it was a kid from Baltimore that was hurt, and I grabbed him before the game and said, "Hey, man, had the little small talk with him, played at St. Francis, so we had a conversation." Like, no, so he didn't play. And sure enough, this one guy that I'm glad I put in the scouting report, he started. We ended up winning the game, so it was a great kind of okay, Griff, here's the example of where analytics really didn't come into play. We got to literally know the guys, we got to know the players, we got to put in some of the intangibles in regards to. When you break it down, obviously he's done a hell of a job taking Longwood to the NCAA tournament. He's done a great job, and he was a great leader coming in.
Yeah. Well, Griff is a great guy, and he's done, as you said, a terrific job at Longwood, and he and I are still very close. But I've never been an analytics guy in any sport. If you want to show me a stat, I'm certainly willing to look at it, and maybe it tells me something I didn't know. But as I used to say on the UMBC telecasts all the time, I speaking of being old school, the way I judge a player is I watch him play.
There you go.
and years ago, I was at a dinner right after Michael Jordan left North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And he'd been taken, as you guys know, number 3 in the NBA draft behind Hakeem Olajuwon, who's a Hall of Famer,
right,
and behind Sam Bowie.
Sam Bowie, that's right.
And I was sitting at this dinner next to Pat Riley, who, of course, was king of the world then with the Lakers, as he's king of the world now with the Heat. And I made the comment, I'd had a few drinks, that the Portland Trail Blazers would go down not only as the team that drafted LaRue Martin with the number 1 pick, but as the team that took Sam Bowie ahead of Michael Jordan. And Riley looks at me and he goes, see, this is why you media people just don't understand the game. And he said, because Dean Smith always listed Michael Jordan at 6'6", when he's really only 6'4.5".
Oh boy!
And I looked at him. I said, Pat, I watched a kid play for 3 years in college.
Yeah.
If he was 5'4.5", I'm telling you, he's going to be one of the all-time great players.
Okay.
And Riley looked at me and he goes, you know something? You're young and you're loud. Well, now I'm just loud. But I was still right.
That's right.
Because I watched him play.
Right. Well, let alone the Kentucky bias. Like Sam Bowie was a Kentucky guy. A lot of people don't know Pat Riley is Kentucky history.
Plus, Pat Riley is the single most arrogant human being I've met in sports, which is saying a hell of a lot.
Okay. Never met the guy. Never had the pleasure.
I've had the displeasure.
I would love to have a conversation with him about that. Because you know what? Jordan gave him the jab at the Hall of Fame induction. You remember that?
Yep.
About what room they were in, hotel in Hawaii or whatever, and he slipped a note under the door or something about get out.
The thing about Michael is he never forgot a slight.
No. No, listen, that drives a lot of us. Trust me. But
well, we started this convo off the sports journalism piece.
yes.
You know, staying on that same mode, we saw some phenomenal journalism coming out of the student newspaper, the Daily Northwestern,
Yep.
In the Pat Fitzgerald situation, where it seemed like the paper single-handedly forced the president to make a play here. What are your thoughts on students making such a move at such a high-profile university and a high-profile job for somebody with Pat Fitzgerald, who was kind of a king up there in Illinois?
Yeah, Pat Fitzgerald still is, Northwestern football, dating back to his days as a great linebacker on their 1996 Rose Bowl team, all-time winningest coach at the school. But I love when student papers commit journalism. And I have said for years, one of the reasons I still write for the Washington Post is because I believe in journalism. I believe in daily journalism. I believe in great content, whether it's online or in print, in a magazine, in a newspaper. And, you know, so many kids nowadays, when I was in college, all I wanted to do was someday work for the Washington Post because my parents had moved to Washington while I was in college. I started reading it daily. Watergate happened while I was in high school. Woodward and Bernstein happened. I read all the President's Men. My goal was to someday work at the Washington Post. I was very lucky because I got a summer internship there at a college and ended up getting hired. I had never thought that would happen. But nowadays, a lot of kids, a majority of kids who are in high school, in college, they want to work for ESPN. ESPN's become the gold standard. I talk to kids all the time, and I say, well, what do you want to do? I want to work for ESPN. A lot of them see the Washington Post or the New York Times or the LA Times or any of the great papers as stepping stones to television in general, to ESPN in specific. I don't think, 60 Minutes obviously has done great TV journalism for 50 plus years. And there are occasional sports stories, but people talk about 30 for 30. I think most of the 30 for 30 suck, to be honest, because they all end up being puff pieces on the subject. I mean, look, I covered Len Bias at Maryland. I knew him well. I liked him a lot. But the notion on the first 30 for 30 they did was on Len Bias. And the theme of the whole thing was that night was the first time he ever used cocaine. Oh, come on. Let's not be stupid about this. And again, I was a big Len Bias fan. I thought he was going to be a Hall of Famer. Yeah. And that's what most of the 30 for 30s are. And I'm saying that not to put down ESPN, although I'm happy to put down ESPN, but to make the point that the best journalism, 95% of the time, is still committed in print. And so when I see the kids at the Daily Northwestern not buy Pat Fitzgerald's story that he was Sergeant Schultz and knew nothing, and go out and report the hell out of the story to the point where you're right, Kevin, the president clearly didn't want to fire him. Initially gave him a 2-week suspension in July, when there's no practice or games going on. He was going on vacation anyway.
That's right.
I wish somebody would suspend me for 2 weeks and pay me
during vacay time. Right.
Yeah, while I'm going on vacation. And the kids at Northwestern at the newspaper broke the story, and good for them. And I hope they keep after it because the story's clearly not over. And I hope that others, whether they be student newspapers or not, look at what they did and said, aha, you can still do commit good reporting.
Well, John, the one thing, and the kids today, I got 2 college students in my house under my roof. I say this all the time in adjusting to coaching, just like parenting. I tell the coaches in staff meetings and conversations, it's not their fault that they're glued to their screens and things of that nature, because since my kids were in the car seat, in the back seat of wherever we were going somewhere, I've had a device in their hand, and we had this conversation. Right. Because it started out with leapfrog, and they learned their numbers and colors and foreign languages. Like my youngest son is fluent in Spanish, and it went from leapfrog to watching a movie, and you put the screens, the monitors, they keep them quiet in the car when we're traveling. Like we're going places or we're going to the store. And then they told me, I forgot about the next device was a PSP. And so this PSP was a device that they could play video games on, they could watch movies on. You put the little cartridges in, it had Wi-Fi, and then it went from there to a little iPad to a cell phone. And so I'm sure parents today with their kids, like and I remember being at Virginia Tech, this was 04, 03. Like I'm driving across and the kids are literally walking across the street.
Yep.
And now it's on campus. A lot of these college campuses where the students, the pedestrians have the right of way, regardless. But I'm like, she has no idea that I'm driving down the street and and it's not at the crosswalk. She's in the middle of just walking across the sidewalk, going from class to class. So getting back to Northwestern, everyone has the opportunity to have their own radio and TV network called social media. So it's the gift and the curse. Lawrence Tunzel, who was the Mississippi offensive lineman, was supposed to come to the Ravens, I want to say in the top 10 that year as an offensive lineman. All of a sudden, the day of the draft, this video comes out of him smoking marijuana through a gas mask. And so now he drops. I don't know where he dropped from top 10 to wherever. So it cost him millions of dollars in his initial draft and a signing bonus and things of that nature. But what same thing make you laugh, make you cry with social media and understanding it. Those kids, I've been on staffs where the kids go to the local newspaper, the student newspaper. Jeff Ball at Youngstown State tried to get us fired. I mean, literally, he was on the cover of the student newspaper with his Youngstown State jacket on with this picture, with his big Y, and he tried to get us fired because he didn't want to do extra running or something. It was the day we were doing 2020s for conditioning. He just freaking quit. Then next thing you know, it was bananas. But yes, they have a voice, and but they're called as a coach. So I might be a little biased to Coach Fitzgerald's situation. They're called college kids for a reason. And that's where that transformation into adulthood and the invention of social media and they having these devices can come back to haunt them and hurt them. When college, you go to learn and adjust and become a person, go from childhood to adulthood. And a lot of them want to avoid that. They want to avoid that maturation process. They just want to go straight from childhood to adulthood.
Well, what are you saying? Are you saying that Pat Fitzgerald should be protected more in this situation? Or
No. I'm saying I'm not, because I haven't really read into what happened. And so,
okay.
And forgive my ignorance in regards to the topic, but there's a ton of scenarios where the kids get it wrong. And
they didn't get it wrong here.
Not this time.
Eric,
yeah,
they didn't get it wrong here.
No.
And it's sort of an easy cop out when because I broke stories as a student reporter when I was at Duke, and I still remember Carl James, the athletic director, calling me one time and saying, "John, you and I can still be friends, but I'm never going to speak to you again." And I said, that might put a dent in our friendship, Mr. James. But, I think that you're right that student journalists are trying to learn on the job. And good for these guys. See, because, Eric, the easiest thing in the world to do is to be a cheerleader as a so-called journalist. I see it here in Washington all the time. I mean, for years, Dan Snyder was protected by the media until he went so far over the line that people finally had to start criticizing him. My good friend Tony Kornheiser was a big Dan Snyder defender for years. And Tony's as smart as anybody I've ever met in the business. The easiest thing is to say, oh, we love Pat Fitzgerald and, he didn't know anything. You know very well, Eric, because you've been both an assistant coach and a head coach. In the end, the head coach takes the bows for the wins, and he's got to take the responsibility for the losses.
No doubt.
This is one of those situations where Pat Fitzgerald's been a great coach at Northwestern. But you can't simply say, well, because he's won a lot of games, this is okay. And by the way, I'll add one other thing. Anybody who thinks the hazing that was documented, and I use that word on purpose, at Northwestern, only happens at Northwestern
Right.
I've got some oceanfront property in Oklahoma I want to sell you.
No doubt. I mean,
that's why the story is ongoing.
Yeah, a few good men. Did you order the code red? Like,
Exactly.
You goddamn right.
From Pat Fitzgerald, wanted to kind of transition. Also, get your thoughts on this Bob Huggins situation as well. And it hasn't been a great summer for Hugs there. Had the situation with the that wasn't a slip up. That was a deliberate comment on the radio station, and then the unfortunate DUI recently. But now had a meeting with his team, said, I'm allegedly said, I'm no longer going to coach this team, something to that effect. The university was happy with that. Bob Huggins says no. That did not happen. I did not agree to just walk away here, and I want my job back. We're talking about one of the most iconic coaches of all time on the court. Thoughts on Bob Huggins, John?
Well, Kevin, I've known Bob Huggins since 1989. I first saw his first Cincinnati team play in Hawaii, and Cincinnati had won, I believe, 7 games the year before, and they were good. They really guarded. They were impressive, and I became friends with Bob Huggins that week in Hawaii. I spent a good deal of time with him. That's one of the great things about the preseason tournaments. The coaches are a little more relaxed.
That's right.
They're in Hawaii. And 3 years later, they make the Final Four. So for once, I got something right. And I've known Bob. I wrote a column about Bob when he resigned or didn't resign. And I started it with a story just so people would know I was biased. In which several years ago I was interviewing Bob, and I had said to him, "Why aren't you in the Hall of Fame yet?" And he said, "Probably because you've been my biggest supporter," which I had been. And I was delighted when Bob got into the Hall of Fame. I've always liked him, liked his dry sense of humor. Everybody knew Bob drank. I mean, he had a DUI in 2004, I think it was. He survived a heart attack the year before that.
Pittsburgh Airport, yeah.
Yeah, in the Pittsburgh Airport, right. And so when I heard this story about the DUI and the fact that he blew .21 is a lot. When I say this, as the son of an alcoholic, my mother was an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. So I understand about eating too much. I understand about, she never drank and drove, but she drank a lot for several years. And my thought was, okay, Bob's almost 70. He's going to be 70 in September. This is a bad incident. Why was he driving without an assistant coach? When Mike Krzyzewski was still coaching, his assistants used to joke that when they wrote their memoirs, it was going to be called Driving Coach K. Not because he drank, because he didn't, but because he didn't like to drive. So one of the assistants always had to drive him. So why didn't Bob have somebody driving him back from the camp to Morgantown? I don't get that. But my thought was, okay, he's had a great career. He's in the Hall of Fame. He made a bad mistake. First on the Cincinnati radio station, as you mentioned, Kevin. And then with the DUI. Now Bob says the charges are going to be dropped. I don't know how that's possible at .21, 0.08 maybe, but not at .21.
Yeah.
And this is becoming a sad story. It was a sad story to begin with.
Yeah.
When he was clearly forced to, quote, resign. And it's only going to get sadder, I'm afraid.
How do you see this? How do you see this ending here, John?
Well, I don't think he's not going to coach again. I think what's going to happen is that they're going to negotiate some kind of buyout. The lawyers will get together, and Bob's lawyers will say he wants his job back. They'll say, "Okay, here's $1 million. I'm making up the number.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Drop it, and let us move on, and let Bob move on, and let Bob, I hope, get some help." My mother eventually went to rehab. It changed her life. My friend David Feherty, we mentioned the book I wrote on him. David went to rehab too, and flunked out after 12 days. It wasn't right for him. Rehab's not right for everybody. Mm-hmm. But I hope Bob gets some help because I think he needs it.
Well, and the disappointment is, because I've known Hugs for a long time, since the Cincinnati days, and his longtime assistant and good friend that I thought
Billy
He's
Hahn.
fired Larry Harrison.
Oh, Larry Harrison. Okay.
During this season.
Yep.
That it's a little bit of karma because the dynamics of a successful coaching staff and that long-term success, let's just say Larry did a lot for Bob and helped, like you say, why didn't any of the assistant coaches? Because all that time Larry was there, I'm sure Hugs did a lot of drinking.
Yeah.
Just like Cincinnati. Like I've been at golf outings with Hugs where they had pitchers what I thought was water. It was vodka.
Yeah.
He literally is playing golf with pitchers. But he had drivers, right?
Yeah.
And so I say that to say, getting rid of Larry, and I personally talked to Larry, friend. Like he's one of my mentors. I left working in the ACC to come work for Pat Kennedy because of what Larry said. His transition wasn't to becoming a head coach and the respectability of working for someone like Pat Kennedy and a former ACC Coach of the Year. That the dynamics of that staff, and I don't know those guys, but I know DeMar Johnson that just joined there this year. He replaced Larry. But what took place on that staff and what's going on in West Virginia basketball under Hugs, that was a disappointment. And that was a little bit of I think I'm just going to use karma because a lot of things are out of your control. You have as a staff all these different egos and personalities and skill sets that they bring to the table. Hugs and Larry, I know, were really tight because they were together for over 20 years as coach and assistant coach for a long time and very successful. I mean, Final Four, Big East Championship at and Final Four at West Virginia. Like Hugs has been to 2 Final Fours at 2 different schools. And so great coach, Hall of Fame coach. But whatever took place in that last year and the fact that a lot of guys in this new generation of coaches, I don't know if it's the young guys on the staff or whatever, that wanted the success or wanted the credit for the wins and things of that nature, that comes into play. But for Larry to get fired in the middle of the season, like there's a lot going on in West Virginia, and it's time. I don't know.
Everything you say is true, Eric, and what it leads to is we don't know what happened.
No,
we don't know what was going on. We don't know what the situation was with Bob.
Right.
His good friend Billy Hahn died about 2 months before this incident.
Yeah. So
we just don't know. All we know is it's sad.
Without a doubt, and let's leave it there. You're 1,000% right, and the difference that happens at a lot of levels. It's not just at West Virginia, the powerful
question
in coaching, not just in basketball, football. It happens.
In life.
Amen.
Life.
One of Eric Skeeter's favorite books, Raise a Fist, Take a Knee, Race and the Illusion of Progress in Modern Sports. And he really wanted to dig in a little bit about this book. And Skeet, I'll let you kind of take it away here. But you were really passionate about this book, and I can speak on your behalf. I mean, your understanding of the Black struggle. When growing and trying to get those leadership roles, and your understanding of that dynamic is greatly appreciated.
My first question, John, is just what motivated you to write this book and tell this perspective of the illusion in sports? Because that caught me when your title, because it literally is like how much of a factor race comes into play with things and the illusion of it. Like, what was the thought process behind getting started and writing this book?
Well, there are a lot of things, Eric. I mean, the long answer is my life. I mean, I grew up in New York City.
Okay.
I was a good enough player that I could play with the black kids in my neighborhood and at my school. They used to call me white boy. And I've lived my entire life in sports, which means that I've been around a lot of black athletes, a lot of black coaches, a lot of black administrators. And we could sit here for the rest of the day and talk about examples where the only thing that kept someone from getting a job was being black.
Right.
And, it's a double standard in that owners in the NFL, alumni in college sports, they're more than happy to have black players on their teams because that's how you win. Let's be honest. In most cases, but they're more hesitant about having blacks in leadership positions. And this is 2023.
Yeah.
And it was 2019 when I decided to write this book.
Okay.
And it was really, it was something that had been building inside me for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And as different incidents took place, the incident with Mike Shanahan and Donovan McNabb in Washington, which was in 2010, where Shanahan, who's probably going to get voted into the Hall of Fame this year, benched McNabb and late in the game. And his explanation after the game was that Donovan, he didn't think Donovan knew the 2-minute offense well enough. This guy's played in the NFL for 11 years.
Right.
Borderline Hall of Famer. And I don't know if you've ever dealt with him, but a very bright guy. And then the next day, his explanation was he didn't know if Donovan was in shape to run the 2-minute offense. This is 9 games into the season. And then the next week, mysteriously, as always happens, an anonymous source told ESPN that the Shanahans, Mike and Kyle, had to cut their playbook in half for Donovan. So they've now called him not smart enough to learn the 2-minute offense, out of shape, and dumb.
Right.
Which were all those stereotypes about black quarterbacks in the 60s and into the 70s and even the 80s. And frankly, it pissed me off. I'm no fan of the Washington football team by any means, but so I went on a local TV show and I said it was racial coding. I didn't call Shanahan a racist. I said, which he may or may not be. I said it was racial coding to use these different excuses. And what really got to me was how all my colleagues in the media attacked me for saying this. In fact, Rick Riley, who's one of the most talented writers I've ever known, wrote a column on ESPN.com saying, how dare I call Mike Shanahan a racist for benching Donovan McNabb? Well, that was fine, except A, I didn't call him a racist, and B, it had nothing to do with the benching. He's the head coach. He can bench anybody he wants to bench. But it had to do with his explanation. So I finally went, I'm trying to remember what when Colin Kaepernick happened.
Okay.
You guys know all about it.
You got into that a lot. That was a really good chapter.
I went to John Thompson.
Yes.
I'd known since I was a kid reporter at the Post.
Yes.
And John and I had battled when I covered Georgetown. John didn't want reporters to have access to players. My job was to have access to players.
Right.
But we'd become close after he retired. And I went to see him because I'm not going to say he is the smartest guy I've ever known, but he's right up there.
Yeah, same here. Don't doubt.
And I said, I want to do a book on the black experience in sports. I want to try to understand it and to make readers understand it. And he looked at me in his unique way and he said, John, you might as well try to explain the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, coach.
And then he said, and that's why you have to do the book. You're the one who has to do the book.
Hey, all right.
And
well,
so from that point on, I was determined to do the book. There were 5 publishers, who turned me down. My agent basically fired me because I refused to give up on the project. And I'm very proud of that I went ahead and did it and what the book produced. And as I said in the introduction, you know this, Eric, I would never claim to say I understand the black experience because I'm white. But I talked to people who did explain the black experience to me. And I think I came to understand it a lot better as a result. And I hope the readers did too.
No, it was an outstanding perspective because, John, my perspective, you did an article, I think I told you this before with UMBC. And just so everybody knows, John was the color commentator for UMBC when we came in as a staff in 2016 at UMBC. And so every home game, and for 2 years that I was there with Ryan Odom, every home game. So, after I got over, honestly, John, the initial, it's John Feinstein. And
of course my wife would feel that way.
You autographed my books and things of that nature, Last Dance and what is that, March to Madness, and the third one I can't. So you became Skeets and John, and literally that's how it is. And I was fortunate to have this relationship with you that you did an article on Fang Mitchell in '98.
I did.
Called March Sadness. because, and that was my second year in college coaching. So in my career, a quick synopsis, but I was on a magic carpet ride of high school, AAU, and then college basketball success of winning a Memorial Day AAU tournament in Columbus, Ohio, where we beat New York Riverside. Ernie Lurch, right? The great Ernie Lurch. We beat that team.
Yep.
Then I go to St. Francis. My last year at St. Francis, we went to Alhambra. We were the first Baltimore Catholic League team to win the
First
Alhambra.
non-DeMatha team to win it.
Well, Baltimore, Calvert Hall, and St. Francis are the only two ever. Mark Amatucci's 82 team with Mark Wilson, Pop Tubman, Dwayne Farrell, and the Edwards brothers, and then Mark Karcher and that team in 96. So there's only two in the history. And then go my first year at Coppin State, 97, as a 15 seed, we were the third 15 seed in the history of the NCAA tournament to beat a 2 seed.
Yep.
Beating South Carolina, and we lost the Texas by 1 to go to Sweet 16
on a Sunday afternoon.
Yes, sir. And so I'm on this magic carpet ride. And so that next year, we beat Missouri. We lose our best players, Turpin Mott, Reggie Welch, and the seniors. But we still have Danny Singletary, Antoine Brockington, Fred Warwick, and that crew. We lose. Well, first of all, we beat Missouri at Missouri. So Missouri scheduled us coming back from Hawaii as a guaranteed game, and we popped them, right? So we go in there, beat Missouri at Missouri. We have a winning or close to a winning non-conference record going into the MEAC.
All the games on the road.
Yes. We win the regular season. We go to the championship game. South Carolina State has a great season. I don't know if they had 20 wins or not. Coppin State, coming off of, obviously, the NCAA tournament last year, we're in the championship game. And they were saying the loser of the game will go to the NIT. And back then, the regular season title winner didn't get that automatic bid. I don't know who was in New York. PJ Carlissimo's dad, I think they said, headed up the NIT committee back then. And so we lost a 1.2 point, one possession game to South Carolina State to go to the NCAA tournament. And we're waiting for the call to go to the NIT. We got 20-some wins. We beat Missouri. We're coming off NCAA tournament last year. Never came.
Nope.
Call never came. And when you did that article, I was like, wow. Literally, there's a picture of Fang with a ball in the Washington Post. It's like, this guy really gets it, because we're at a HBCU, and it wasn't this whole, the notoriety of the HBCU basketball. Like, Fang literally helped launch that, in my personal opinion. Ben Jobe and what he did, and obviously the greats of Big House Gaines and John McClendon. But this is in the advent of the March Madness.
Right.
And we got a letter from Jesse Jackson in 97 about the little school that could, when we beat South Carolina and almost went to the Sweet 16. I say all that to say is the book, you touched on so many things. And Kevin, I'm going to send you the quote with Big Coach Thompson on ESPN, where he's like, I'm sick of the Tubby Smiths and the John Thompsons of the world, where as a black coach, you have to be great. You have to be twice as good to get the opportunity to fail. And that's the like Eric Bieniemy and Charlie Strong in football, right? And how hard and long Charlie Strong and the history of coordinators in college football and national championships. There was always the coordinator of a national championship team got a head job, got a major head job. And so at the BCA meetings in 2013 and 12 or 13, it was in Florida, might have been 11, but Charlie Strong, and they had someone from the search committees, because this is now the advent of the search committees in the hiring process, right? And I don't know if it was, which was the big one out of Georgia. I can't remember what search firm was there, but Charlie Strong had went at the guy because he was in a biracial marriage. So literally, he said to the head of this search firm, you guys didn't hire me. I went through the search through you, and you guys didn't hire me. Now, he was at that time the head coach of Louisville. And so he had gotten a head coaching job, but he had talked about all the things that he went through in the process of interviewing, overqualified for positions, successful as a coordinator under Urban Meyer, and did not get a job. Same thing with Eric Bieniemy now as a coordinator for two.
He still hasn't gotten a job. He's been a coordinator for 2 Super Bowl champions.
That's exactly right. Still hasn't gotten a job. Now he's in D.C.
Right.
And God bless him, because he took the wrong job. But that's my Ravens bias coming out.
Well, you don't have to be biased to think that working for Washington is a mistake. Although hopefully new ownership will change that, but it will take a while. But yeah, everything you say, Eric, is true. And you know, the other thing is now they have the rule where if you win your regular season and you don't go to the NCAAs, you must be invited to the NIT. But two things. If you tie for that regular season title, you don't have to be invited.
Right.
And they don't invite you. And two, and I've seen this happen year after year, the HBCUs, they get invited because the rules say they have to get invited, and they're always 8 seeds playing on the road somewhere.
Yeah.
In the first round.
And let me ask you.
A few years ago, Norfolk State went into Alabama and won.
Sir. It cost A.D. Johnson his job.
So, you know, I am a defender of the mid-major conferences in general. But let's go back for 1 second, and this isn't racial, but just in general, to your UMBC team that beat Vermont. Mm-hmm. You don't think Vermont was worthy of an NCAA bid that year?
They were.
You guys beat them at the buzzer. Jarris hit that amazing shot.
Right.
Vermont should have been in the NCAAs that year. Forget the NIT. Right. But that's a whole nother issue. But what amazed me, and I know 100% talking to you two guys, every black person I interviewed for Raise a Fist, Take a Knee, which was about 100 guys, every single one had been stopped at some point, at least once, usually multiple times, but at least once for DWB. Yeah. Driving while black. Right. Yeah. And they all had stories about it. And Ed Tapscott, my good friend, who was general manager of the New York Knicks.
I know him well.
He had an apartment in Riverdale, which is a Tony neighborhood. And he would drive after a game from Madison Square Garden to his apartment. He still has a house in D.C., but he said at least once a month he'd get pulled over in Riverdale for DWB. And he said one night while the cop was checking his license and registration and everything, he said, you pulled me over just because I'm a black guy driving a nice car. And what do you think about that? And this is after the guy had confirmed that he hadn't stolen the car. And the cop looked at him and said, "It's not fair. You're right." And Eric and Eddie said, "Well, at least you're honest." But this goes on all the time.
So let me ask you.
Sports, it goes on all the time in the world.
Let me ask you a question, John, because I was raised under the John Thompson, John Chaney's, Frank Mitchell's in that era.
And by the way, Frank Mitchell, one of the most underrated coaches ever.
Yes, without a doubt. The success he had at Coppin State.
Unreal.
Thankful they put his name on the floor and we got all that. Because Frank had a little bit to do with that too, because he was a little bit upset with the people in leadership at Coppin, rightfully so.
He had made all the money by playing all those road games.
Listen, that's a story. We might have to have you back on for that segment because that's a whole nother thing. But having come up and having been so I went to my first BCA meeting was 1991. And so the formation of that organization and the people like George Raveling, Big Coach, John Thompson, John Chaney, that whole...
Rudy Washington.
Yes, thank you. Rudy Washington. That whole organization, and shout out to Kenny Eggman Williamson, and Ed Tapscott's my wife's cousin. So literally, I've known Ed and I respect him until it's all of my career. But I take on, like, I said this to Coach Thompson. He was at our UMBC game when he did the radio.
That's right, in Charlotte.
For CBS. He was there at the game. So when we played Kansas State, we had a nice little chat courtside before the game, and my wife got the picture of it. I was like, and obviously, not too long. I worked his camps in the 90s. Like, I was a product of Craig Estrick, Mike Riley, John Thompson, and the Georgetown way of doing things. And my question is, my challenge to today's coaches, right? You look at the black head coaches, the most outspoken black coach in college sports today is Dawn Staley. It's not Ed Cooley. It's not Shaka Smart. It's not Leonard Hamilton. It's not. Now, when George Floyd was murdered and during the pandemic, a lot of positives came out of that in regards to taking and making sure minorities get opportunities in college sports, namely in basketball. I think there was like 15 to 20 head coaches hired at the highest levels in the Power Fives and the Big East. But my challenge: who is in being the outspoken one in regards to what's the plight of? Because big coach John Thompson's issue was leveling the playing field for student athletes to give them the opportunity to be successful.
Well,
because, like he said in his book, he would have not been able to go to Providence had it, the test scores, the NCAA testing standards, the SATs and the GPAs, that fight for Prop 48, the Prop 42 when he walked off.
right.
And I'm asking this question. I know I'm being long-winded. Who do you think, besides Dawn Staley, could be that spokesperson and impactful, intelligent? Because Coach is very intelligent, was very intelligent, and his impact on his industry.
Well, let me say first of all, I think Shaka Smart has been pretty outspoken.
Shaka,
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why he had to leave Texas.
True,
because the white racist boosters didn't like the fact that a black guy said that it reflected poorly on the country that Donald Trump was elected president, among other things.
Right.
Now, if he'd won a national championship, they probably wouldn't have been so critical because they know how that works. And that's where Dawn Staley comes in. You mentioned a bunch of coaches. What has Dawn Staley done that none of those
No doubt.
And so I think what we really need, John Thompson got his platform when he first went to the Final Four in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a statement in the Friday press conference because somebody said to him, how does it feel to be the first black coach to take the team to a Final Four? And John's response was, I was in the room, I resent the hell out of that question because the implication is I'm the first black coach capable of getting to a Final Four.
Amen.
And that's not true. Big House Gaines, if he'd been given an opportunity. John McClendon, if he'd been given an opportunity. And others might very well have gotten to Final Four. I mean, Wake Forest job opened, 8 times during John McClendon's career. He never got an interview.
Wow.
How do you have that guy sitting right across the street?
Yes.
Same with Big House, who was right across the street.
And in the state in Carolina, I happened to have a mentor who played with Al Attles at A&T in the 1950s or 60s.
Right.
He said John McClendon was the most successful coach and the biggest coach in the state of North Carolina, bigger than Dean Smith.
Well, that was before Dean Smith became Dean Smith.
True.
Remember, Dean Smith didn't go to his first Final Four till 1967. But McClendon won and won and won, and so did Big House. I think Big House had the all-time record for wins for a long time until Dean went past him, and then of course Bob Knight and Mike Krzyzewski.
Right.
But I think that we need more black coaches given platforms because I know from knowing them, as you do, Eric, that there are plenty of black coaches out there who can contribute to the dialogue if people will listen. See, that's the problem. People aren't listening. They're only listening. Danny Hurley's a friend of mine, but Danny Hurley can't contribute to this dialogue after winning the national championship. We need more black coaches to be given the platform because I can't remember who else you mentioned among successful coaches nowadays. Ed Cooley. He's certainly capable, and maybe at Georgetown he'll get more of an opportunity to speak up if he wins. You have to win. No, to listen to you.
No doubt, you need that platform, and then that takes me to with the it's and I got so much to ask you, John, in regards to like the BCA, right? When that was formed, its initial stages. I've had coaches, old school coaches, and my mentors tell me like their jobs were threatened as an assistant coach if they attended this first big meeting in Vegas.
Oh, I believe that.
And so now, since George Floyd's murder, it's almost like the world. And with your book, I was so I literally I couldn't put it down, and literally I got it on tape as well. So I'm driving and listening to it as well, and hearing you really saying it, like all those issues with college sports that we'll get into the NCAA a little bit later, but I'm just thankful for someone like yourself you have the relationship with Big John, because his boldness, his intelligence, and his honestly, he took advantage of his size.
Oh, yes, he did.
And his presence. Because my first BCA meeting, again, was in 1991 when David Burse was one of the guest speakers.
One of the great stiffs of all time.
David Burse was the head of enforcement for the NCAA. And so my man Collins, that was the head coach at UIC, was at Illinois
Chicago Circle.
Yes. Jim Collins.
Jimmy Collins.
So Jim Collins. So, Coach Thompson, literally, Jim Collins was going at David Burse and things that, an investigation with Bruce Pearl and things, the back and forth about,
the whole Illinois thing.
Yes. And so Coach Thompson said, you guys attacked this man and we brought this man in here. He was defending David Burse a little bit.
Right.
And he basically said, the presidents of your universities and things, those are the ones that are the heads of the NCAA and that are making the rules. And if you have to get the relationship with them, we brought him in here and he said, my man, he points over to Jimmy Collins and he says, if you did give a kid $100,000 in a truck, you a damn fool. He said,
as you know, I have a million John Thompson stories.
So he says, all we give them is hamburgers, tennis shoes, and bubble gum in Georgetown, and they love it.
Right. Well, you might remember back in 2005, after that whole disaster at Baylor with Dave Bliss, the college coaches had a big come to Jesus meeting in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And John, how do we stop this and how do we fix our image? And John was asked to come in and speak. He was retired at the time, but he was obviously an icon.
Mm-hmm.
And Richie McKay, who I'm sure you know, he's now the coach at Liberty.
Yep.
Very good coach, very good guy, deeply religious, as you know.
Yes.
And Richie stands up and he says to John, Coach, isn't the best way for all of us to do better is to improve our relationships with Jesus Christ?
Mm-mm.
And John looks at him and he says, let me tell you something. And he uses his favorite word. M is the first half, F is the second. The way for all MFs to improve your image is for y'all to stop cheating. I saw him. I wasn't in the meeting, obviously, but I heard about it from a number of guys. And the next time I saw him, I said, that's the greatest thing you ever said.
Well, but now, to be called a motherfucker by Coach Thompson.
But I was a term of endearment.
Yes.
The famous story I tell in the book about when I offered to go outside and fight him, because he got mad at me for yelling at his alter ego, Mary Fenlon. And he put his arm around me and he said, let me tell you something, MF. I don't like you. I don't like you at all. But I respect your ass because you're fucking crazy. It was a term of endearment with him.
But
Ski, let me jump in here. I'm gonna pose a question to both of you guys off of this book and what you guys are talking about with the empowerment of coaches and also coaches speaking out on deals. Simple question: does the ascension of Deion Sanders help or harm future Black coaches trying to enter the ranks and grow in the coaching ranks?
Kevin, the answer is simple. If he wins, it'll help. If he doesn't win, it'll hurt. And I'm someone who wrote a column before Deion. I've known Deion forever. I first knew him when he was playing for the Braves in 1992. I got to know him well when he was with the Ravens in 2004 because I was writing a book about the Ravens that year. And I'm a big fan. I mean, again, you talk about John Thompson and how smart he was. Deion's like that. Deion's really sneaky smart because people see all the glitz and glamour and they don't get how smart he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's going to win at Colorado. And I think it will be good. I wrote a column before he got the Colorado job saying that my alma mater, Duke, should hire him for a couple reasons. One, Duke's never had a Black football coach. And it's well past time. Now, they had an excuse in basketball because they had the same guy for 42 years, and he was pretty good.
That's right.
But they had no excuse in football. and I thought Deion would bring the kind of attention to the program. Who cares about Duke football? Nobody. Attention to the program, recruiting potential to the program that other coaches, white or black, couldn't bring. Now, Mike Elko's gone out and done a great job in his first year, but I think if Colorado succeeds under Deion, it will open up gates for other black coaches. If he fails, then everybody will say, you see, he was just an HBCU guy.
Well, it's funny you say that because the HBCU impact that he had, and John, you know this, and and I was disappointed, obviously, in Delaware State's lack of support of what Deion was trying to accomplish at Jackson State with Rod Milstead at Delaware State. So Rod Milstead and we became friends from the interview process. When I interviewed at Delaware State, Rod Milstead asked me a great question, a pointing question of, Coach, tell us a story of a relationship you've had with a player that being in college changed his life. And I told a story of a kid that Belmar Rocky Coleman at Towson was, when he was a kid, was a squeegee boy. Was on a corner and, selling waters and washing windows in the streets of Baltimore. And his senior year in high school, his grandmother died, who was his basically his guardian, because his mom was on drugs, that brother killed in the streets. And so when he came to Towson, John, he filled out his application and financial aid form. He signed both student and parent and guardian. And I'm looking at the application and I'm like, no, Rocky, you can't sign it. So I told that story about Rocky.
Right.
Because this kid was basically at 18 years old, was on his own.
Entering Gary Neal, too, who you guys
that's a story for another part of this interview as well. But Rod Milstead played at Delaware State in the 90s, won MEAC championships as an all-conference player, was drafted to the NFL from Delaware State, played multiple years, multiple teams, won a Super Bowl, was Deion's teammate with the San Francisco 49ers. And literally, you never knew that. That never was out there. And I say his name in the beginning because when I say that, I pose that question, I say, now, who is that? And people be like, I don't know. Yeah, right. Played in the MEAC, came back to coach's alma mater after being drafted and winning an NFL Super Bowl, and you don't even know his name. And he's coaching the same time that Deion's at Jackson State. So a lot of the HBCU transition for Deion was because of who Deion is.
Right.
Deion Sanders is Deion Sanders. If he went to Towson and coached football, if he went anywhere to coach, he went Division II, like his high school program that he built, Prime Prep. It's because of who Deion Sanders is.
Exactly. And that's the problem. You don't have – there's only one Deion Sanders.
Yes.
Yes. And I was with you. I know how hard it is at HBCUs and at Delaware State. I was with you the night you were begging alums for $10,000 to renovate the locker room. $10,000. An ACC coach would just take it out of his pocket and say, you want 50s or 100s.
Yeah, that's right.
That's, money is always the difference in the world.
Yes,
you know that.
The resource.
And
yes.
I would love to see a place like Del State or any of the other HBCUs, specifically in the MEAC, which I've covered. Mm-hmm. I'd love to. I hope Howard puts some money into their basketball and football programs after the success Kenny Blakeney's had.
Yeah.
They don't just pat themselves on the back and move on.
And don't think that he's just going to be able to repeat that, rinse and repeat, because he lost his best player. He lost his point guard, his starting point guard from DeMath, who was there for 2 years, now transferred.
Right.
And
that's the other problem for mid-majors is you have success in today's world. The big schools swoop in and say, we'll get you $100,000 in NILs if you come and play for us.
Well, and Kev, keeping on topic, the challenge, I think, for in Deion in this transition will be, be able to recruit players, get players, and he did. I mean, he got the best player. It just so happened it was a Florida boy. He was going to Florida State that he had. So it's going to be challenging him to recruit. And obviously, and I've said this, John, many a times on a lot of different platforms. In football, you're only, and in all coaching, you're only as good as your staff, but it's glaring in football because I tell my son who's a rising, he wants to be a coach, but he wants to coach football. Football is his sport. And you have to coach the offense and the defense. And then there's breakdowns on both sides. The quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the linemen, the running backs, the DBs, the defensive linemen, the linebackers.
Special teams.
All those position coaches, and we haven't mentioned special teams. Punt, kickoff, punt return, kickoff return. So, they give Nick Saban all this credit for winning all these championships, but I'll be damned if his staff ain't pretty freaking good. Because
he should get the credit because he hired the staff.
No doubt, he's the leader.
That's what
he's the leader.
He's the CEO. But there's one. I'm going to tell you Deion's biggest challenge, because he will recruit.
Mm-hmm.
His biggest challenge is, especially in football, which is still dominated by white people in leadership positions, is that he's so honest. People don't like honesty, and they especially don't like it from an outspoken black man. If he wins 9-10 games a year, he'll be an outspoken black man.
Yeah.
If he wins 5 games a year, he'll be fired.
Well, and that in Deion's intelligence, he's been in the media, so he understands and knows how to handle it. We still have to grow as people to be able to sit down at the table, regardless of race, color, or creed, and religion, and be able to just. That's what I love about sports. Like John, I played lacrosse, so growing up
there you go.
And being that minority, I lived it, but at the same time, I was able to have lifelong relationships with people that literally did not care about my skin color. And honestly, I wasn't better than those guys. I mean, the guys I played with on this team, they went to Hopkins, Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, won national championships and things of that nature as players. Let's just say, if that day is coming in sports, and that's why I loved your book, because that's spearheading, and I hope everybody that hears about this goes out and buys it and reads your book. All walks of life, especially leadership in sports and in the university and college sports, and we'll get in NIL, because the issue with a lot of these is it starts with the leadership and the lack thereof, because
look at Mark Emmert. He was the emptiest suit I ever met.
No, an idiot.
And everybody is all excited about this new guy, Charlie, the former governor of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
One thing you mentioned what John said in 1991, it's the presidents who control the NCAA.
Right.
It's not Mark Emmert or Charlie.
Right.
What?
You're right.
Yeah, I'm forgetting his last name. But anyway, so let's move on to the finish, because I have to go write a book today.
That's a good day when you're writing a book. I do have one very strong question for both of you. And that question is, what did they say? It's Eric Skeeter's favorite game, where he loses miserably each week. But what happens is there's 3 quotes that'll be played on the screen, and both of you will be guessing what was that word or phrase that was said in there. And if you are correct, you get no prize, but you do get the pride of winning. What
story of my life? No prize, just prize.
Yeah.
We'll start off with a very famous coach that both of you may know. We'll go back to the 1992 West Regional before the practices began for that tournament. It's Coach Bob Knight. He had a quote where he was kind of upset about how the times of the games were lining up beforehand.
Bobby Knight.
Here's that quote from Bobby Knight.
I think that we should probably start at, maybe 7 in the morning and alternate games, because I think that way we could interest across the country in basketball.
Any guess?
I'm going to let you answer that.
I'll play it again if need be. Do you need me to hit it one more time?
Sure, why not?
All right, let's play it one more time. Bobby Knight before the 1992 West Regional. What did he say?
I think that we should probably start at, maybe 7 in the morning and alternate games, because I think that way we could interest across the country in basketball.
Eric, don't be cold. You got a guest here. You guess first. Don't just be trying to put John out here.
We could. John was probably at that press conference.
No, I wasn't actually. 1992. They did make the Final Four that year, and they lost to Duke. But I was not at that regional.
I got you.
I was at what was called the Christian Laettner Regional that year.
Yeah, that was a good.
What did Bobby Knight say? There's a lot of avoiding of the question here. What did Bobby Knight say?
We're going to introduce. I don't know. Man-to-man offense. I don't know what he could have spent.
Any guess there, John? Or do you want me to play it one more time?
No. He's referencing women. And I don't know if he used a profanity or not. But I think given the context, he would not use the C word, but he would use the P word.
Ooh.
Let's see what Bobby Knight said.
Yeah, let's see what he said, Kevin.
I think that we should probably start at, maybe 7 in the morning and alternate games, because I think that way we could interest housewives across the country in basketball.
Housewives.
He didn't go to the profanity.
Yeah.
There you go. You know Bobby Knight better than anybody.
I'll give him a point there. The words.
Yeah, you got to. See, now I don't get to, John, just so you know, you're the guest, but I said shots and it was 3-pointers and Kev didn't give me the points. So I just want you to know let the record show.
Let the record show. Well, at least I knew it was women.
Let's go to 1983, the NCAA championship game. Jim Valvano, Lorenzo Charles knocks down a game winner, and they knock off the Houston Cougars. Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. Jim Valvano with a very excited post-game presser. What did he say?
He looked at me, and I looked at him, and it's true. For like a split second, we just stared at each other. I said, we won the national championship. Just like that, bang, it was over.
What did Jim Valvano say there?
Holy shit.
Let's hit it one more time. Are we confident? What'd you say there, John?
I was going to say fuck.
Let's play it one more time.
He looked at me, and I looked at him, and it's true. For like a split second, we just stared at each other. I said, we won the national championship. Just like that, bang, it was over.
Like that, bang, it was over. Let's see what Jim Valvano had to say.
He looked at me, and I looked at him, and it's true. For like a split second, we just stared at each other. I said, it's over. We won the national championship. Just like that, bang, it was over.
It's over. It's over.
I thought there was a word in between.
No.
Oh, no. That's why we both thought there was a word in between, I think.
No, now we're making
it. Now, you remember Name That Tune? This is like Name That Tune.
Yeah.
I don't even know if Kevin knows enough to know Name That Tune.
Yeah. The great John Feinstein is 1 for 1. No, 1 for 2. Derek Skeeters is 0 for 2 and has officially already lost the game. Let's go to our third and final quote. It's the great Coach K. I guess, John, you may know this person very well. It's his speech to the crowd after his final home game. Let's see what Coach K had to say.
It's hard for me to believe this is over. And so I'm just going to say the is over. All right?
2 words there. What did he say? Let's hit it one more time.
It's hard for me to believe this is over. And so I'm just going to say the is over. All right?
The hard part.
Oh, the hard part. Can he go 2 for 3 and win his first ever attempt at what did they say?
I'm going to go with holy shit.
In front of a live crowd, he said this. Finally,
you heard the reaction.
That's true.
How about that?
What did Coach K say?
It's hard for me to believe this is over. And so I'm just going to say the regular season's over. All right?
Regular season.
I forgot. That's not the Mike Krzyzewski I know and love.
Much to my glee, I've got 2 losers of what did they say. But a phenomenal episode nonetheless. Feherty, the remarkably funny and tragic journey of golf's David Feherty, is out now. John, thoughts on the book? You said it's been getting quite a bit of love for you.
It has, and I credit David. His story is unique. I don't know how. I know Eric follows golf, but
yes,
I don't know about you, Kevin. But he grew up during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. He's been an alcoholic all his life. He was a drug addict in the 90s. He lost a child to a drug overdose. He's lived a tragic life, but he's also lived an extraordinary life because he became such a big star on golf telecasts. He was a very good player. He beat Payne Stewart in the Ryder Cup in 1991. That's how good he was. And we've been friends for 30 years. And he and I sat down and we talked through his life in great detail. He did not hold back anything. There was no point where he said, I don't want to talk about that, even though there were some very painful things, obviously, that we did talk about. And as you said, Kevin, the books, it's funny because my last two books, I've been writing books now since 1986. My last two books, Raise a Fist, Take a Knee, and Feherty, may have gotten the best reviews ever. So I guess I got to keep working.
Fine wine. Down you like that.
Thank you, Eric.
Well, and so I want to have you back because we didn't get to touch on NIL and the transfer portal, and I got to get what your take is because NIL and I want to leave us with this quote from from Walter Byers, the Kansas City Sports Commission's annual gala. Byers he said this at the state, and I want to leave this for our listeners. Walter Byers says, each generation of young persons come along and they ask, Coach, give me a chance. I can do it. And it's a disservice to these young people that the management of intercollegiate athletics stays in place committed to an outmoded code of amateurism. And I attribute that, quite frankly, to the neo-plantation mentality that exists on the campuses of our country and in the conference offices and in the NCAA. The coach owns the athlete's feet. The college owns the athlete's body, and the athlete's mind is supposed to comprehend a rule book that I challenge David Burse, who's sitting down in this audience, to explain in rational terms to you inside of 8 hours. So
that's long after Walter Byers retired.
Yes.
Because remember, it was Walter Byers who invented the phrase student athlete.
Thank you, John.
Which was to cover up the fact that the top players in college in football and basketball were not amateurs.
Right.
He wanted to perpetrate the myth that they were amateurs.
Right.
And in fact, I said this to Mark Emmert one time, not only is student athletes an incredibly hypocritical term, but it's redundant. By rule, you can't be a college athlete unless you're a registered student. and so it's like calling someone a person man or a person woman. It's completely redundant. And just to take it one step farther, Cal Poly Pomona years ago was put on probation and forced to forfeit 2 football games because the way they registered their students was they allowed them to go to classes, try out the classes, and then register. So because they had football players who technically weren't registered, they had to forfeit 2 football games. That's the NCAA.
Well, and that's where that's a whole nother show. That's a whole nother show.
As we get closer to the football season, if you're open to it, John, we'd love to have you back on and talk some transfer portal, some NIL love stuff that is near and dear to Eric Skeeter's heart for sure. We'd love to chop it up. John Feinstein, esteemed author, journalist, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Good to talk to both of you guys.
Thank you.
All right,
John.
brother.
All right.
Top assistant. I'm Kevin Wilson. That's Eric Skeeters. That's John Feinstein here on the show. We'll see you guys next time on Top Assistant.
My man.